April 1805. Napoleon, Emperor of France, was undefeated across Europe. At sea, only the British fleet could stand against him. One day, the HMS Surprise, carrying 28 cannons and 197 crew members, was sailing off the northern coast of Brazil. The Admiralty had ordered Captain Jack Aubrey to pursue a French privateer, the Inferno. This well-armed vessel was heading to the Pacific, ready to start a war. That day, the Atlantic Ocean was shrouded in fog, with very low visibility. While scouting, a crew member suddenly shouted that he heard a noise on the starboard side, something like a bell ringing. The officer of the watch, Hallam, hurried forward to check. After carefully observing with a telescope, Hallam vaguely saw the silhouette of a ship through the fog. But in an instant, the ship disappeared again. Due to Hallam's lack of extensive sailing experience, he was unsure whether to beat the drum to bring the Surprise to battle stations. Finally, under the orders of another midshipman, Calamy, the drum sounded, and the crew took their positions. Hearing the drum, Captain Jack came to the deck and observed the situation with a telescope. However, after looking around, he didn't see any enemy ships. Hallam was firm, believing he indeed saw the ship's silhouette, and insisted on not falsely reporting the situation. Although Jack didn't see the enemy, he thought Hallam did the right thing. He then instructed the two midshipmen to return to their posts, stating he would continue to scout the area. But as the Surprise sailed deeper into the fog, the ghostly enemy ship suddenly fired at them. Quickly, the powerful barrage dealt a heavy blow to the Surprise. After a brief chaos, Jack immediately ordered the Surprise to charge towards the enemy ship, dragging it into cannon range. The two ships then faced off for the first time. The enemy ship was indeed the Inferno, the very ship Jack had been desperately searching for. But the Inferno was well-equipped and had superior firepower. More importantly, they held the advantageous upwind position, making it difficult for the Surprise to win. Seeing many crew members injured and the ship severely damaged, Jack did not dare to prolong the fight. He quickly used various methods to maneuver the Surprise back into the fog, escaping the Frenchman's sight. Ultimately, Jack succeeded, and the Inferno did not pursue them further. While checking on the wounded after the battle, Jack noticed a young officer, Bettany, had been injured and rushed over to check on him. Bettany's right arm was severely wounded and needed amputation, which made Jack feel guilty. Because he was friends with Bettany's parents, he was unsure how to explain their child's future disability to them. Soon, Jack's close friend, Dr. Stephen, performed the amputation. Bettany remained strong throughout the entire process. Despite his face contorting with pain, he did not utter a single cry. The doctor was very impressed by Bettany's composure. He said Bettany was the bravest patient he had ever seen. Afterward, the ship's officers began to discuss their next tactics. It was evident that the Surprise had now turned from hunter to prey. The Inferno had already located the British ship first, and their cannons had a longer range and the ship was faster. In a direct confrontation, the Surprise would have a hard time gaining the upper hand. In this situation, many officers believed they should return to repair the ship to avoid encountering the Inferno again, but Jack rejected this suggestion. Their mission was to search for the Inferno. Now that the Inferno had appeared, this opportunity had to be seized. Jack planned to bring the ship close to a submerged reef area, then quickly repair the ship. Once the repairs were mostly done, they would continue pursuing the Inferno to prevent the French from causing trouble in the South Pacific. Soon, the Surprise arrived at the location Jack had planned and began the repair work. While anchored, Jack visited Bettany again. To comfort him, Jack gave Bettany a treasured biography. The protagonist of the book was the British naval commander Horatio Nelson, who also lost his right arm. Jack had previously served under Admiral Nelson and participated in the Battle of the Nile. Nelson's military prowess and patriotism were greatly admired by Jack. Now, all of Britain pinned their hopes of defeating Napoleon on him. At night, Jack and Stephen played music together. As both were string instrument enthusiasts, they would often sit together and play a few pieces. Of course, their actions caused some trouble for the crew members who didn't understand music. They thought it was noise. Amidst the elegant atmosphere of classical music, the Surprise spent several days in calm weather. One day, two crew members approached Jack. One of them, William, was very familiar with the structure of the Inferno. Before the Anglo-French War began, this ship was actually built in America, and William's brother-in-law was a shipbuilder. This allowed him to witness the entire construction process firsthand. Because of the unique structure of the Inferno, William had a deep impression of it. Based on William's description, his friend Joseph made a model and hoped it would help Jack. Jack was delighted and rewarded the crew with rum, then brought the model to the meeting. However, seeing such an advanced ship structure made the other officers more desperate. Compared to it, the Surprise seemed like a lamb. How could they defeat such a strong enemy? But Jack was very optimistic, believing that as long as it was a ship, it had weaknesses, and weaknesses could be exploited. A few days later, the Surprise approached the coast and began trading with the locals. During this process, Jack learned that a French ship had previously docked here and then continued sailing south. Jack was convinced that this ship was the Inferno, but they were 3 weeks ahead of them. So, Jack ordered the Surprise to speed up, aiming to catch up with the French as quickly as possible. At night, the crew sang and danced because, thanks to Dr. Stephen's treatment, an old crew member who was seriously injured had successfully recovered. However, when Midshipman Hallam joined in singing, everyone fell silent. At this time, many superstitious crew members believed that Hallam had brought bad luck to the Surprise. After all, he was the first to spot the Inferno. Feeling ostracized by the crew, Hallam felt very uncomfortable. A few days later, the Inferno reappeared in the sight of the British. This time, they were still in the upwind position, waiting for the Surprise to come within their firing range. Seeing this situation, Captain Jack shouted that the French were dishonorable. The crew then hoisted the sails to the fullest and ran at top speed. They increasingly believed that the Inferno was a devil ship, sent to claim British lives. But this time, the French were not ready to give up. They pursued the Surprise relentlessly without any intention of turning back. After a whole day of fast sailing, Jack finally ensured that the ship was not hit by enemy fire before nightfall. As night fell, visibility on the sea was very low. In this situation, Jack began his maneuver. He first arranged for a decoy boat with lanterns to sail towards the Inferno, while the Surprise remained hidden in the darkness with all lights out. When the French saw the small boat, they immediately fired. Jack used this to determine the position of the French ship and successfully mislead them. Then, he quickly changed direction, steering the Surprise silently to the upwind position of the Inferno. This way, they could seize the advantageous position and attack the Inferno. With his many years of sailing experience, Jack quickly adjusted the Surprise's course according to the wind direction. By the next day, after making a wide circle, the Surprise was now closely following the Inferno stern. Seeing the unfavorable situation, the French hurriedly retreated. In the second confrontation between the two ships, the Surprise emerged victorious. Taking advantage of the favorable wind, Jack ordered the pursuit of the Inferno. However, during this pursuit, a storm suddenly swept across the sea. At this point, the Surprise had sailed near Cape Horn, the boundary between the Pacific and Atlantic Oceans. Despite the severe weather putting the Surprise in jeopardy, Jack refused to give up. If they let the Inferno escape, the French would smoothly sail into the Pacific. Amid the raging winds, a broken mast along with its ropes fell into the water. The Surprise began to tilt, and only cutting the ropes could help right the ship. At that moment, a crew member who had climbed the mast fell into the water. It was William, who had previously helped Jack recreate the Inferno model. William was desperately clinging to the ropes, trying to get back on board. However, if they insisted on saving William, the broken mast would certainly capsize the ship. After a painful struggle, Jack and William's friend Joseph had to cut the ropes themselves. With William's sacrifice, the Surprise was saved, but the Inferno had already vanished. After the storm, the sea calmed, but the crew of the Surprise became anxious. After facing several disasters, they believed the Acheron was a ghost ship, and how could mortals defeat a demon? Even though the captain was always called Lucky Jack, good luck eventually runs out. Despite the shaky morale on the Surprise, Jack was determined to complete his mission. No matter how many opposed him, he had to defeat the Inferno. After crossing the Antarctic waters, Jack set his next destination, the Galapagos Islands. British whaling ships often operated there and had bountiful harvests. Napoleon would never pass up such a big prize, so the Inferno would surely be there to raid British ships, and the Surprise's task was to hurry there and catch up with them. Upon learning that the Surprise would be stopping at the Galapagos Islands, Stephen asked Jack if they could stay there for a few more days. Being a naturalist, Stephen was eager to study the wildlife. The Galapagos Islands were said to be teeming with strange animals, providing a unique opportunity for observation. Jack quickly agreed. They were planning to resupply there anyway, and it wouldn't hurt to indulge his friend's curiosity. Soon after, the Surprise sailed near the Galapagos Islands. The beautiful scenery and bizarre animals astonished the crew. Seeing flightless cormorants and swimming iguanas, Stephen and Blakeney, who also loved natural sciences, were thrilled. They decided to bring some of the animals back to England for detailed study. As the ship was about to dock, Jack noticed a few shipwreck survivors. He quickly rescued them and brought them aboard. It turned out these people were crew members of a whaling ship. The whaling ship had been attacked by a French privateer, and most of the crew were captured. Only these few had escaped. From their description, Jack realized that it was the Inferno that had attacked them. He then decided not to dock and instead to chase the Inferno along its route. This decision deeply disappointed Stephen, who blamed Jack for breaking his promise and preventing him from landing to study the animals. However, Jack believed that such amateur research was insignificant compared to their military mission. This led to a heated argument between the two friends. No matter what solutions Stephen proposed, Jack refused to listen. He angrily told Stephen that this ship was not a private yacht and no one had time to play around. Eventually, Stephen conceded. Seeing his dejection, the midshipman felt very sympathetic. To comfort Stephen, Bettany gave him a strange beetle he had discovered, suggesting it might be a new species. Stephen could study it, so they would still have something to show for their efforts. Touched by Bettany's kindness, Stephen gratefully accepted the gift. To defeat the Inferno, Jack led the crew in systematic battle training. During this time, to motivate the crew, Jack loudly asked them 3 questions. Do you want to be defeated by the French? Do you want Napoleon as your king? Do you want the children of our country to sing the Marseillaise? If not, then train hard for me. From that moment, the battle between the Surprise and the Inferno was no longer just a clash of captains. It became a fight for dignity, fueled by patriotism. Under Jack's training, the crew's attack speed increased, and their combat abilities improved significantly. However, trouble soon befell them. Since Jack hadn't taken them to resupply at the Galapagos Islands, the Surprise sailed into the deep sea with a severe shortage of fresh water and food. Combined with the ongoing windless, scorching weather, most of the crew had lost their morale. Jack was also distressed. Since he became captain, he had rarely encountered so many days without rain. The once lucky Jack was now running out of luck. The crew began blaming the misfortune on Hallam, the first to spot the Inferno. On the day of the storm, it was because Hallam climbed the mizzen mast that Joseph's friend William fell into the water and drowned. Now, it was Hallam's turn to be officer of the watch, and the wind had stopped, and it wouldn't rain. Thus, they believed he was a jinx, sent by the devil to bring harm to the Surprise. To express his dissatisfaction with Hallam, Joseph openly refused to salute him and then physically bumped into him. Seeing this insubordination, Jack was furious. He ordered his men to seize Joseph and administer a flogging as a warning to the others. Afterward, Jack called Hallam to him. Understanding the situation, he knew that Hallam's poor reputation among the crew had led to this incident. Jack advised Hallam that he couldn't be friends with the sailors because he was their superior. In the face of disobedience, Hallam had to dare to punish them. Of course, Hallam should not be a tyrant. He must command respect and obedience through his authority. Only by upholding respect through strength and discipline could the Navy defeat the enemy. However, as the crew's morale worsened, Stephen hoped Jack would ease up on the strict management and limit their alcohol consumption. But Jack refused, insisting that strict management was necessary to prevent mutiny. Rum was the sailors' lifeblood, and restricting it would certainly lead to a riot. Due to Stephen's ongoing opposition to autocratic management, he and Jack clashed once more. This time, Jack remained unyielding. He warned Stephen not to attempt to incite a revolution on the ship. After Joseph was flogged, the crew's attitude toward Hallam improved slightly, but their eyes still showed hatred and resentment toward Hallam. Hallam himself began to believe he was possessed by a demon, the cause of the Surprise's misfortunes. One night, Hallam walked alone on the deck and encountered Bettany. Bettany told Hallam that the captain said the wind would rise the next day, then it would rain, and soon everyone would have water to drink. Hearing this, Hallam sadly said it would definitely rain. He then thanked Bettany for his kindness and care during this time. After saying this, he picked up a cannonball and leapt into the sea. Poor Hallam only needed to hold on a few more days to witness the rain. Although Jack was deeply saddened by Hallam's death, the immediate crisis had passed, and he had to refocus on how to defeat the Inferno. A few days later, the crew suddenly spotted a seagull flying near the Surprise. The lively bird immediately caught Stephen's attention. However, just as Stephen was carefully observing the bird, an officer was also attempting to shoot it down. As a result, due to a mishap, the officer accidentally shot Stephen in the abdomen. Upon hearing the news, Jack quickly called for other crew members who had some medical knowledge. Although the Stephen had not sustained a fatal wound, the bullet had to be removed from his body, or he wouldn't survive for long. Considering the ship was too unsteady for surgery while sailing, Jack had to find a way to bring the ship ashore. In making this decision, Jack was tormented. At that moment, they had already caught up with the Inferno. With a little more speed, the Surprise could leverage the advantage of the wind and defeat the French. But for the sake of his friend, Jack chose to give up the pursuit. Ultimately, he brought the crew back to the Galapagos Islands. Then they set up camp on land, trying to treat Stephen. The crew understood Jack's decision, as Stephen's importance on the ship was irreplaceable. Besides, the two were longtime friends. Stephen was a tough guy. He believed the crew couldn't perform the surgery well, so he decided to do it himself. He had someone hold a mirror to his wound and, enduring the excruciating pain, remove the bullet from his abdomen with his own hands. In the end, the surgery was successful. The crew looked at the resilient doctor with admiration. Taking advantage of Stephen's recovery time, Jack decided to camp and not set sail. They could spend a week replenishing supplies and relaxing. Stephen could hardly believe it and asked Jack why he had given up chasing the Inferno. That wasn't his style. Jack explained that he couldn't be sure if the ship was indeed the Inferno. Even if it was, there was no guarantee they could defeat it. Now that the Inferno escape was a fact, Jack was ready to return home. Maybe in a few days, they might catch up with the Anglo-French peace talks, and there would be no need to fight at all. In the following days, Stephen, Bettany, and another crew member began studying the island's wildlife. They meticulously observed each new and exotic animal and took detailed notes. After researching several animals, Stephen started to traverse the entire island. He was searching for the flightless cormorants he had seen before. While he was looking out from a high vantage point, he suddenly spotted a privateer flying the French flag. Stephen believed it was the Inferno resupplying at the island. Determined to inform Jack immediately, Stephen decided to return to the camp at once, considering his mobility issues and the need to be carried. Along with the burden of too many specimens, Stephen reluctantly released most of the animals. He hurried to notify Jack to set sail and pursue the enemy. Thanks to Stephen's timely report, the Surprise was able to set off at full speed in pursuit. On the way, Jack specifically approached Stephen to express his gratitude for his selfless dedication. During their conversation, Stephen and Bettany showed Jack an insect they had brought back. This creature could camouflage itself as a twig to escape predators. After observing insects for a while, Jack suddenly had a new idea. Directly chasing the Inferno was challenging, given its faster speed, but there was a way to lure it in, by disguising the Surprise as a whaling ship. The Inferno was a privateer tasked with raiding British vessels. If the Surprise could use the disguise to trick the Inferno into approaching, they could engage in direct combat. Combined with the tactical training Jack had previously given the crew, they would surely defeat the French. Under Jack's leadership, the sailors quickly disguised themselves as whalemen. Their plan was to approach the Inferno and suddenly open fire with their cannons. Then, in the ensuing chaos, they would board the enemy ship and rescue the imprisoned whalemen. While the Surprise might not have the advantage in a long-range fight, close-quarters combat was another matter. Jack's plan succeeded. The Inferno soon noticed the disguised whaling ship, the Surprise. On the eve of battle, Jack addressed the crew. He told everyone that the French thought they were lambs to the slaughter, but in reality, they were hungry beasts. Napoleon's army was threatening England, and this ship was part of the defense. From that moment on, the Surprise represented their homeland, no matter how powerful the enemy's cannons were or how fierce their sailors. As members of the British Navy, everyone had only one option: to fight to the death. Inspired by Jack's words, the crew's morale was high. They were ready for battle. Soon, the Inferno approached the Surprise and loudly demanded they stop and surrender. A few minutes later, the Inferno sailed alongside the Surprise. At Jack's command, the crew raised the British naval flag and quickly executed their plan, firing upon the Acheron. The French realized too late they had been deceived. The whaling ship they intended to rob was actually a British warship. Caught off guard, they lost their firepower advantage completely. The Surprise quickly took down part of the Inferno masts. After a fierce exchange of cannon fire, the Inferno was no longer able to escape. Taking this opportunity, Jack led his soldiers to draw the two ships close and began boarding the Inferno. The battle on deck was extremely brutal. Many British officers and soldiers died in the fight. Meanwhile, Bettany, who was in charge of guarding the Surprise, demonstrated his leadership skills. He quickly organized the gunners for fire support and made tactical adjustments based on the situation. As the whalemen imprisoned on the Inferno were rescued, the British gained a significant advantage. With Jack fighting at the front lines, British morale was exceptionally high. After a chaotic and bloody struggle, the French were completely defeated. After the battle, Jack approached the prisoners. A man claiming to be a doctor informed Jack that their captain had died. Before dying, the captain had instructed the doctor to give his sword to Jack. Jack accepted the sword and then organized a funeral for the fallen British sailors. Despite the Surprise's victory, they had paid a heavy price. After prayers, Jack committed the bodies of the fallen soldiers to the sea, hoping their souls would enter heaven. After the funeral, some of the crew and the rescued whalemen took over the Inferno. They planned to take this prize to a British-controlled port. Tom Pullings would be the new captain of the Inferno. Upon hearing this, Tom Pullings was thrilled. He was finally getting promoted. After bidding farewell to Tom Pullings, Jack prepared to return to the Galapagos Islands. He knew Stephen still wanted to continue his research on new species there. Now, he finally had time to help his friend fulfill that wish. But while the two were sharing their feelings, Stephen mentioned that he knew the doctor of the Inferno. This poor man had died of a fever months ago, leaving the injured on the Inferno without medical care. Hearing this, Jack was stunned. He had just seen that doctor. The captain's sword of the Inferno had been handed to him by that doctor. After a moment of thought, Jack realized he had been tricked. The captain of the Inferno was still alive and had staged the scene to deceive him. Worried about the safety of Tom Pullings and the others, Jack decided to catch up with the Inferno immediately and personally escort them back to port. Seeing his wish to return to the Galapagos Islands fall through again, Stephen was somewhat disappointed but supported Jack's decision. Jack comforted him, saying, "The cormorant you want to find can't fly anyway. When we go back later, they won't have gone anywhere." With Jack and Stephen's cheerful music playing, the film entered its final scene. The setting sun cast a golden glow over the sea as the Surprise hoisted its sails and sailed into the distance, pursuing the gradually disappearing Inferno on the horizon. Although the enemy had not been completely defeated, no matter what tricks they tried, they could never again overcome Jack and his legendary warship. In Master and Commander, The Far Side of the World, the portrayal of Captain Jack Aubrey is quite three-dimensional. In battle, he is an excellent commander, adept at using the conditions of time and place to turn disadvantages into advantages. At rest, he is a man of high culture. He can play classical music with Stephen and supports him in his biological research. In times of crisis, he is a stern leader. He does not sacrifice the greater good for minor gains and never allows anyone to break military discipline. Considering these traits, it is clear that Jack embodies the ideal growth of that era. In the film, the Surprise is not as powerful as the Inferno and is initially at a disadvantage in battle. However, the reason Jack and his crew can defeat the French lies in their discipline and conviction. Historically, under Napoleon's aggressive advances, Britain successfully relied on its disciplined and well-commanded navy to avoid homeland invasion and consolidate its maritime supremacy. In Master and Commander, the battle between the Surprise and the Inferno reflects the naval struggles between Britain and France of that era. That's all for today's video. Thank you for watching. I'm Movie Lover. Please subscribe to my channel, and see you next time.